I need to add an addendum here because I've thought of some things that I left out that should be included in the story of my memories. So I'm going to add them here. The first one occurred when I was 14 or 15. I'm not sure which. I had been taking speech from Adra Lee for about 10 years. No, I beg your pardon, for about 5 years. And she decided that I ought to have a private recital. Now, it was customary in those days when a person had taken something like piano, for instance, for a number of years and was doing well in it, that the teacher might present them in a private recital. And people were invited to come and just hear that one person play on the piano. And it was supposed to be an honor to be able to have a private recital. It was a big deal. Well, Adra Lee decided that I was ready to have a private recital in expression, since she had been teaching me expression for a number of years, and she thought I was doing well. So she talked to my parents, and they were very enthusiastic about it. And so she ordered a one-act play for me to memorize to present in my private recital. And it had several characters in this play, and each character was very different. So I could recite the story of this little one-act play, giving the parts of each of these different characters. So I memorized this little play, and Adra Lee went over it with me for weeks, having me to learn to emphasize just the right things and so forth, to give the right expression to each thing. And also she gave me a serious poem, a very meaningful, quite long poem to give in my private recital. And she had me practice that for weeks too. And then I practiced it on my Abba's grandmother, bless her heart. The Lusk grandparents had so many younger grandchildren, they didn't have time to hear me practice on them. So anyway, so I practiced and finally Adra Lee told my parents she thought I was ready for the recital. So it was decided to give it in the form of an afternoon tea for women. And my mother made a list of all the women she knew in Cleburne. And I think it was about 100 women. And invitations were printed and sent to those women. And a violinist, a man who played the violin, was engaged to play during the intermissions in my recital. And my mother's sisters were asked to serve the refreshments at the refreshment table after the program. So it was all planned, and the invitations were sent, and then programs were printed for the recital, and everything was ready, and it was given at the Liberty Hotel, in the ballroom of the Liberty Hotel, which was the nicest place in Cleburne for something like that. And so it was all prepared and given, and it looked like nearly all the women invited came. It was a huge crowd. And the refreshment table had been set up at the back, but without the refreshments on it. And they would be added after the program. So Adra Lee came out and gave an introduction, and then she introduced me, and I came out and I recited that one-act play. And it was so funny that people laughed and were really very responsive to it. And of course, that was encouraging to me. And so I got all through the one-act play. And then at the end of it, we had an intermission, and the violinists played while I went in a little room and sat down for a minute and drank some water. And then after the violinist finished, I came back and gave this serious reading of this meaningful poem. And after that, the violinist played again while the refreshments were being set out on the refreshment table. And my mother invited everybody to come over to the table for refreshments, and her sisters did the serving, her younger sisters. So it was all really nice affair, and so nicely planned and carried out. And there was even a nice article in the newspaper afterwards about it. And of course, my mother was very happy, and I was so happy for her to do something that really pleased her. And so that was my private recital. And so then another special thing that I remember with my mother was about the movie Gone with the Wind. Now, I think this was when I was 15. And my friends and I had been reading about the movie, and we were so excited about it, and so excited about that story. And it was going to just be shown in a very limited number of theaters. It was not going to be shown in Cleburne, and was only to be shown in Fort Worth in one theater for a short period, and they would have 2 showings a day for this short period. So of course my friends and I thought we had to get to Fort Worth to see that movie. And guess who was the only mother willing to offer to take us? course, it was my mother. None of the other mothers offered. So my mother said she would take us, and so uh, it was all arranged, and so she went around and picked up the girls. And in those days, cars did not have bucket seats, so you could get 3 people in the front seat. And in the back, if you squeezed together and sort of sat a little bit on top of each other, you could get 4 in the back. So I think we had 7 people in the car. There was no limit on the number of people you could put in a car in those days. So we rode to Fort Worth, and we went real early to be sure we would get seats. And so we went in and got our tickets, and they were selling programs in the lobby, which was a magazine with pictures of the movie, and of course each one of us had to buy that. And then we got our snacks, and then got our seats very early, and had plenty of time to pick out good seats. And oh, we were so excited. And we were not disappointed at all. We absolutely loved the movie. And I tell you, I remember loving it, and I would love to see it again today. Anyway, we loved it, and there was an intermission, and I remember when the intermission came, we didn't even want to get up and leave our seats. We were so spellbound by that movie. But we realized we ought to go to the restroom, and so we did, and then came back and got our good seats and saw the rest of the movie. And then on the way home, all we could do was talk about the movie and our excitement about it, and I'm sure we were probably talking at the top of our voices. And I should have said in the beginning that this was in the winter. It may have been during our Christmas break, but I know that it was in very cold weather. And but that didn't bother us, of course, at all. And we were just so filled with the movie. And so all the way home, of course, we were talking at the top of our voices about how wonderful the movie was and reliving it all. And we were not aware at all of what my mother was doing. Well, she got us home, and she took all the girls, each one to their house. And then we got home. And it wasn't until later that night that I heard my mother talking to her sister. She said that was the hardest thing she had ever had to do, was driving back. It started sleeting, and it sleeted all the way back, and the road got so slippery that the car was actually sliding from one side of the road to the other. And my mother was petrified. She had never had to drive in that kind of weather before. And here was this car full of little girls talking excitedly about that movie. She never once told us to quiet down or to be still or anything. She just let us go on and have our fun talking and remembering about it all. here she was having the most difficult time she had ever had driving, she said. And it was just terrible. And bless her heart, I had no idea. None of us had any idea what a hard time she was having. We weren't even aware that it was sleeting or that the road was getting slippery. So that was my mother taking us to see Gone with the Wind and coming back in that slippery, icy road. So that's my mother. I get starting to cry just thinking about it. She was so wonderful, never once complained, and never once asked us to quiet down or anything. She wanted us to enjoy reliving the movie. Anyway, we had a wonderful time that day, and I'll never forget it. And I don't think my friends will forget it either. So those are two things that I remembered especially that I wanted to add. And then I just thought I should add something about our shopping for clothes. In Cleburne, there were just not any good place to get attractive, stylish clothes for little girls and for teenage girls. And so Mother would take us to Fort Worth to shop at the beginning of every fall, every spring, and every summer. And I remember that this really worried my father because his job at the bank depended a lot on the stores in Cleburne having good business and being very successful. And it really worried him for us to go shopping in Fort Worth instead of Cleburne. My mother always had to explain to him, these are things we could not get in Cleburne. And he would say, all right, it's all right for you to go to Fort Worth if you're sure you only buy things that you could not get in Cleburne. Every time he worried about it. And we worried about what the neighbors thought because everybody was so nosy in those days. And we would come home from Fort Worth with the whole back seat of the car just filled with bags from different stores. And it was obvious they were from Fort Worth stores. So we felt like we could not let the neighbors see us carrying in those bags from the car. And so we would disguise the bags some way, like put a coat over several of them, or something like that, so you couldn't see the bags. Or we'd wait till after dark and they could hide them better. But we never just carried a bag in from Fort Worth out in the open because we knew the neighbors would see them and it would bother them that we were shopping in Fort Worth instead of Cleburne. Oh, goodness. So we went to so much trouble to hide those things we got in Fort Worth. And then there was the Christmas shopping in Fort Worth. Uh, my mother also always took us to Fort Worth to see the decorations in the stores in Fort Worth. And if we happened to buy something while they were there, well, that could be managed and could be hidden. But, but the main purpose was to go to see the decorations. And I still remember the fair, which was the nicest store in Fort Worth, had this fabulous display of the three wise men, life size uh, figures of the camels and the wise men on the camels and all. And oh, that was so impressive. And it just looked like real people on real camels to a child. You know, that's the way it looked to us. And that was just so impressive. And another time I remember at Monning's, another store where we did a lot, really most of our clothes shopping. I remember at Christmas one year, they had Colleen Moore's dollhouse. The neatest dollhouse that was being sent around the country, touring the country. and they had it at Monning's for Christmas, and we stood in line for about an hour just to get in to see Colleen Moore's dollhouse and to walk around it and look in all the little windows of the dollhouse. But the best place of all was Leonard's toy department. Now, my mother did not shop at Leonard's because she said their clothes were not good quality. But they did have the best toyland at Christmas and the best decorations at Christmas. So we always got to go to Leonard's at Christmas. And they had two big rooms full of toys. It was amazing. It was the biggest toyland of any store. And they had what I think was called a monorail that ran along the ceiling of the rooms. It was a little train connected to the ceiling that ran all around over all of those two rooms with all the toys. And I can remember when I must have been about 8 or 10 and Ann was about 4 or 5. I remember standing in line, holding on to Ann's hand, and standing in line for a long time to get to take her on that train on the ceiling. And we finally got our turn, and we climbed up some steps that led up to this little train on the ceiling, and we walked along and found seats in the train. And then it started moving, and it rolled very slowly all around those two big rooms of toys. So you could look down and see all the toys and pick out what you wanted. And then the train finally emptied. I mean, finally ended right in front of Santa Claus. And so there were steps to step down off of the train and see Santa Claus right there. So you could tell him what you wanted. So I took Anne on that train and sat with her. So she was not big enough to go by herself. So I was glad to take her, and I had a good time too, even though I was too big for it. And I hoped nobody saw me at the Santa Claus thing. But after we got down and saw Santa Claus, then the mothers were all standing over to the side, and we saw our mother then, and we could leave. So that was the most exciting thing in Fort Worth at Christmas. Also, one other thing about shopping. When I was a senior in high school, the stores in the spring of my senior year, the stores in Fort Worth and in Dallas started inviting us girls. They got the names of all the senior girls in the class, and they sent invitations to us, inviting us to style shows that they had for our college wardrobes. And in Dallas, one store, I think it was Harris's, which was one of the main stores, had a luncheon for us at a style show. And another store in Dallas, might have been Neiman Marcus, I don't recall, had a afternoon tea for the senior girls in surrounding areas and their mothers to come and have tea and see a style show of the clothes they had for college wardrobes. And that was all kind of exciting, to be getting a wardrobe for college and to get to go to all those special style shows and get all that special attention. So that was fun too. So these are just some of the things I remembered about my private recital, and then about Fort Worth and Dallas, and the fun times that we had there. So this is all I can think of right now that I had forgotten. If I think of something else a little later, I'll add it. But as for now, I'm ending this.